So the big question is, what is nanotechnology? Nanotechnology is a multidisciplinary field which involves physics, chemistry, biology, and the engineering disciplines such as materials engineering, chemical engineering, and electrical engineering. And then these feed into more broader fields such as medicine and electronics and general materials. And it really does involve the study of matter which has dimensions which are between 1 nanometer and 100 nanometers. This is a very broad definition and doesn't really include all of nanotechnology. It's not a satisfying definition. So, for example, parts of nanotechnology also involves atomic manipulation, which are much smaller than 1 nanometer, but it's a generally good place to start. The next question this obviously gives rise to is, what is a nanometer and what is nano? So, as a human, we are usually of heights between 1 metre and 2 metres. So a metre is a reasonable length scale for us to understand. And metres are given the unit metres and is shortened to n. We're also quite familiar with the idea of a millimetre. So a millimetre is 1,000th of a metre. And something that usually has a width of a millimetre is a sharpened pencil point. So if we draw a line with this pencil, we'd end up with something which is roughly 1 millimetre wide. So when we write a millimetre, the units come out as mm, and the first m in that case actually refers to the milli, which means 1,000th of, and obviously the second m is then a metre. If we continue to move down the scale, so now let's say for instance we take 1,000th of a millimetre, we end up with a micrometre, which is sometimes called a micron. And this is a millionth of a metre. And because now we're getting to the point where we're having to put a lot of noughts after your decimal point, we can start writing this in the form of times 10 to a number. So 1 micron is often written as 1 times 10 to the minus 6, while a millimetre could be written as 1 times 10 to the minus 3. When we start getting down to the realms of micron, we are talking about the size of bacteria, which again we don't have much idea as humans of how small that is. However, something that we are familiar with is hair, or in my case not, but in this case hair does vary in thickness, but a good guess at a human hair width is between 60 and 80 micrometers or microns. Now if we continue down our scale of size, we next point that is commonly known is a nanometer, or the nano. So this is 1,000 times smaller than a micrometer again. So this is typically written as 1 times 10 to the minus 9 meters, or a billionth of a meter. So as we said earlier, a nanometer or nanotechnology looks at matter which is in the range of 1 nanometer to 100 nanometers. 100 nanometers, to give you a sort of very relevant scale length, is the size of a virus. So it's starting to become incredibly small, and when we get down to this sort of scales, we're starting to become smaller than the wavelength of light. We're starting to get to things that can move around the body, and this is why nanotechnology has its own field. But to try and give you some form of perspective of how small a nanometer or 100 nanometers is, if I compared 100 nanometers to myself as a ratio, it would be the same ratio as my height at about 1 meter 70 is to the distance between Scotland and the South Pole. So it's a huge distance. and I'll leave you with that to think about.